4 college students. One quiet college town. No alarms. No forced entry. No immediate suspect. And yet, before sunrise on November 13th, 2022, something unimaginable had already happened inside a house on King Road in Moscow, Idaho. But nobody knew it yet. The roommates were still asleep. The lights were still on. And outside, the world was completely normal. Until it wasn't. Because by the time the sun came up, 4 young lives were gone. And the person responsible had already vanished into the night. This is the case of the University of Idaho murders. A case that shocked the United States, not just because of its brutality, but because of how ordinary everything looked on the surface. The victims were students living in an off-campus house. A typical college setting. Friends coming and going. Late nights, takeout food, normal routines. But beneath that normal life, something dark was unfolding. And when investigators arrived, they were faced with one of the most confusing crime scenes in recent memory. No obvious break-in. No immediate suspect. And no clear explanation for why this house. And why these students. The night began like any other weekend night in a college town. The students had gone out separately earlier in the evening. Some returned home late. Others stayed in. By the early morning hours, everyone was inside the house. The home had multiple roommates spread across different floors. Doors locked. Lights off. Phones charging. Life continuing as usual. Then, sometime in the early morning hours, a killer entered the home. What happened inside is still known only through forensic reconstruction, but investigators believe the attack occurred while most of the victims were asleep. There were no signs of a struggle that would have alerted neighbors. No 911 call during the incident. No immediate awareness outside the home. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. It wasn't until later that morning that the truth began to surface. One of the surviving roommates reportedly saw something unusual and became concerned. Calls were made. Messages went unanswered. Eventually, friends came to the house. What they found inside triggered an immediate emergency response. Police arrived to a scene that quickly escalated into a homicide investigation. 4 students had been found dead inside the residence. The shock was immediate. But the confusion was even greater. Because at first glance, nothing made sense. There was no obvious forced entry, no known motive, and no clear suspect, leaving behind obvious traces. Investigators moved quickly, but carefully. They secured the house as a major crime scene, collected forensic evidence, interviewed roommates, friends, and people who had contact with the victims in the days prior. Cell phone data, surveillance footage, and vehicle tracking became critical. One detail stood out early: a white Hyundai Elantra seen in the area around the time of the murders. This would later become one of the most important leads in the case. Authorities also began reconstructing the timeline minute by minute. Who was awake? Who was asleep? Who entered? Who left? But the biggest challenge remained the same. There was no clear connection between the victims and the attacker that investigators could immediately confirm. As the investigation expanded, digital evidence and surveillance analysis began to narrow the focus. The white Hyundai Elantra became a central piece of the puzzle. Authorities tracked similar vehicles across states and cross-referenced ownership records, phone data, and travel patterns. Months later, a suspect was identified. A graduate student named Brian Kohlberger. He was arrested in Pennsylvania and later extradited to Idaho to face charges. The arrest brought relief to many, but it did not answer all the questions. Because even after an arrest, the motive remained unclear. Why these students? Why that house? And what led to that night? After the arrest, the case moved into the legal system. Evidence was presented, including digital footprints, vehicle tracking, and forensic analysis. But the defense and prosecution both faced a difficult reality. Much of the public still didn't fully understand the why and investigators were careful not to release all details publicly to protect the integrity of the trial. That silence created space for speculation online, but in official terms, the case was still being carefully built piece by piece. Beyond the investigation, the impact on the community was immediate and lasting. Students left Moscow in fear. Parents demanded answers. And across the country, the case became one of the most discussed modern true crime investigations. It also raised uncomfortable questions. How can a crime of this scale happen without immediate detection? How safe are shared living spaces in college towns? And how much of modern life can truly be secure when people assume safety is guaranteed? The truth of what happened inside that house continues to be examined in courtrooms and investigations. Some answers have been uncovered, but many questions remain. And for the families of the victims, the story is not just a headline or a case file. It is a permanent loss. A night that began like any other and ended in a way no one could have imagined. And the question that still lingers is simple. How did no one see it coming? On July 23, 2025, Brian Kohberger stood before the court and admitted to killing all 4 students. Instead of facing the death penalty, he accepted a plea agreement. The judge sentenced him to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Legally, the case was over. The killer would never walk free again. But for the families, there was no real ending. No sentence could bring back the lives that were lost. And perhaps the most haunting question of all was never answered. Why? Why this house? Why these 4 young students? Why did a seemingly ordinary night turn into one of the most shocking crimes in modern American history? Brian Kohberger has never publicly explained his motive. He took responsibility for the murders, but he never explained the reason behind them. That silence may be the one thing the victims' families will have to live with forever. Sometimes, justice can punish the person responsible, but it can never explain the darkness that led them there. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy true crime documentaries based on real cases, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because sometimes, the most terrifying stories are the ones that actually happen.